Why don't you just say the words we all understand? Working class, eh? Why is he so allergic to using the phrase that we would all understand? Or maybe we wouldn't. Trouble began, as it often does for Starmer, with the right-wing press, I guess, frothing at the mouth, desperate for everything he does to fail. The Labour manifesto mentions working people no fewer than 21 times. The manifesto, of course, also promised not to raise taxes on working people. So it didn't take long for those, well, particularly those with more than a few quid on notice, to start asking, well, am I a working person? I mean, I work. I worked hard. I didn't inherit all my wealth. How dare these communists think of putting up my taxes? Certain sections of the media, rightly, in my opinion, have been pressing the Prime Minister to explain exactly what he means by working people, as Nick was doing months ago. The questioning this week, though, reached Motorhead levels of volume, so much so that Starmer was forced to offer up yet another explanation while at the Commonwealth gathering in Samoa. Sir Keir said a working person is somebody who goes out and earns their living, usually paid under a sort of monthly cheque, but they didn't have the ability to write a cheque to get out of difficulties. Asked if people who drew an income from property or shares were working people, Starmer said they wouldn't fall within his definition. Downing Street immediately issued a clarification of the boss's clarification. The PM didn't mean people who had only a few shares weren't working people. Of course they are. Does that sound right to you? 0345 6060 973 is the number. Considering the phrase working people has been used more than 3,500 times in Parliament over the last 10 years, the barrister PM does seem a little unsure of who does and doesn't qualify as a working person. And I think sensing uncertainty and weakness, the questions from the press keep coming and producing more and more variants on the theme, who is and isn't a working person. Starmer's spokesbod said yesterday that working people are those who have to rely on their pay packets and do not always have the means to write a cheque. It's those hit hardest by economic instability. Really? Yes, what the PM has been referring to, she continued, was the broadest possible sense of who was in his mind's eye when it comes to the importance of economic stability. Or as Peter Walker from The Guardian rather more succinctly put it, a working person is whoever Keir Starmer sees them as being. Ouch. Now with the Labour Party machine doing little to counter the doom and gloom ahead of Chancellor Rachel Reeves' first budget, we all know times are hard, that she's looking everywhere to find cash. What else can she spend until we see growth? I know nobody wants to pay more tax. Actually, that's not true. Back in my TV days, I routinely argued for those earning silly money, as I was at the time, to pay more sensible levels of tax. But everyone is looking ahead to Wednesday's budget to see if they are going to be winners or losers. Working people, whoever they may be, might be in the clear, but spare a thought for those who already have a lot and face being asked to pay a bit more. The Daily Mail presents small-time landlords as worthy examples of working people, even though half of landlords don't work a regular job like working people. Why does the Prime Minister insist on using the phrase working people instead of working class? My theory is as I've said, is working class smacks of socialism, of the old way of doing things, and what Jeremy Corbyn might have said. And we can't be having that, can we? And yet, call me old-fashioned. You're old-fashioned, righty. OK, call me old-fashioned, but had Starmer and the Labour machine talked about the working class instead of referring to working people, I do think we'd all be a lot clearer about who they were referring to. I don't think we'd be talking about landlords as members of the working class or those dealing in stocks and shares, although I don't doubt there are members of the working class that do those things, just not many of them. And of course we still have the billionaire non-dom owners of the Daily Mail and its million-a-year editor arguing that folk like them, they're not upper class or even upper middle class, they're just part of the bog-standard squeezed middle classes, essentially equating themselves with teachers. So, working people, who are you? Maybe we can hear from people who aren't working people and they can define themselves as well. 0345 6060 973 is the number. Now, as I'm aware, I think half of landlords don't have regular jobs, but that means the other half of landlords do. Ben Beadle is Chief Exec of the National Residential Landlords Association and joins me first. Good morning to you, Ben.
Good morning.
Are you a working person, Ben? Up at 7:10 on a Saturday morning to talk to me?
Well, clearly I've nothing better to do than this, obviously. Look, I mean, the comments are not helpful by the Prime Minister by any stretch. There's two elements of this for us, Matthew. Well, firstly, government's own statistics show that 30% of landlords are employed full-time, 10% employed part-time, 28% are self-employed, and about a third are retired, many relying on rental or property for their pension. Well, that's a perfectly responsible and sensible thing to be doing. But there's another point to this, which is, I think it's a grave insult to many landlords that are providing decent homes out there, because there's this sort of undertone that being a landlord is, some sort of passive income that's really, really super easy to do. But let me remind people that being a landlord is a massive responsibility. It requires robust laws in place to make sure that properties are safe and decent. Otherwise, we get absolutely hammered, quite rightly. It rightly shouldn't be easy to be able to rent a property out to tenants in need of a place to call home. And that's why there's over 170 pieces of regulation that's out there. I think many landlords will feel incredibly slighted by the Prime Minister's comments.
It's still receiving income from property is essentially still a passive activity, though, isn't it? I mean, I can appreciate you have to work hard to raise the money to buy the property. But once
that's
you
not
bought,
what the Prime Minister said.
No, I totally agree with you there. Would he have been better advised, from your perspective, to have used the more Corbyn-like phrase, working class, which is something that I would associate with the Labour Party over the best part of the last 100 years? Would that have been any clearer, a more helpful definition, do you think?
No, I don't know that it would have been. I think actually all of this gets lost in the nonsense. Whether a landlord is working or not, frankly, is not the biggest issue at play here. As we've discussed on this programme many times, we've got 21 households chasing every property that's out there.
Sir. Well said.
You absolutely don't win friends and influence people by going out and bashing the very, very people that are actually bothering to provide those homes. Let's also not forget that the private rented sector is picking up a huge amount of slack from the social sector, and I know that's going to be addressed in the budget. But around half of individuals in the PRS are claiming housing benefit. Well, arguably that should be the government's job to be providing social housing.
I find it difficult to argue with you on that point, Ben. I totally agree. It doesn't make much sense. Ben Beadle, lovely talking to you from the National Residential Landlords Association. I'm going over now to Jennifer Jasmine White, writer who focuses on women, class and culture. Good morning to you, Jennifer.
Good morning, Matthew.
Let me just go straight. Do you think he would have been better advised to use the term working class as a more readily available, clearer definition, perhaps, of the people he's struggling to talk about?
No, I absolutely don't think he would. I mean, I think we'd be having the exact same conversations right now, perhaps slightly different ones, but still as inflamed if Keir Starmer had chosen to use the phrase working class. And to be honest, I'm not sure they would have won the election had he done so.
I'm minded to agree with you there. So you're saying he's using language because, as a consummate politician, it's the language he needs to use for the times.
Well, of course. I mean, I think he's using language because it's consciously opaque. I mean, I absolutely agree with Ben that this has all been lost in the nonsense. But the problem here is that we're all being led up this blind alley. We're being whipped up into a frenzy about who are working people, who aren't working people. What we're actually talking about is earned and unearned income and the proportion at which it's taxed. I mean, it's just absurd.
You see, I agree with you. But in using the phrase working people, Keir Starmer is playing straight into the hands of papers like the Daily Mail, who can then use that to argue, well, to obfuscate the very thing you've alluded to, earned or unearned income, and instead they can conflate themselves with the struggling middle classes, as I said in my introduction.
I mean, they absolutely can, and that's obviously what we're seeing playing out now. But as I say, I struggle to see what an alternative phrasing would have been that would have been kind of electorally as successful. From my perspective, the thing that matters is that they did win the election. They are going to make these changes, and let's see what happens then.
Okay. I don't want to keep coming back to landlords, but they seem to be the flavour of the day with regards to this discussion. If we were to have gone down the more traditional Labour Party route of working class, I don't think we would be including or discussing the role of landlords per se, although I don't doubt, in fact, I know working class people from working class roots who are landlords. I totally appreciate your point that the language may have been helpful for winning an election, but now that same language, I would suggest, is possibly working against Starmer.
I think it probably is, but I would also point out that this whole kind of campaign that seems to be being waged, in defence of landlords is from my perspective, as someone who has recently tried to navigate the rental market in this country as a young person, just completely absurd. I'd also point out that, Ben was saying, oh, we must be so grateful to these landlords for providing us with properties. Well, they're not providing us with properties. They just happen to be the people that own them. I mean, the real question here is about affordable social housing. I totally agree on that.
Yes.
But the landlords aren't our saviours for stepping in and being wealthy enough to own multiple homes.
And can I ask just before I go, how would you describe yourself? Are you a working person? Are you working class? How would you define
Matthew,
yourself?
I'm not sure we've got time for that. I mean, I'm a PhD student, so I'm absolutely somewhat of a layabout at the moment. But I'd say I'm a really interesting case. I mean, I come from a very, very working class family. And then I went to some very, very elite universities, and that has changed. I mean,
Yes.
That's why I'm so interested in it, and that's why I like writing and thinking about it.
I have to say that's possibly not as extreme or as your situation, but that the university was very much that was the experience that I had. It took me out of one social background and introduced me to a completely different one. Pleasure talking to you, Jennifer Jasmine White, there, writer from the northwest of England.